You know what's funny about the modern prepper movement? Everyone's got a bug-out bag with tactical gear, freeze-dried meals that cost more than actual food, and enough paracord to rappel down Mount Everest. But ask them to do something our grandparents considered basic common sense, and you'll get a blank stare. Somewhere between the Depression-era survivalists and today's YouTube preppers, we lost some genuinely useful skills. Not the flashy stuff, not the things that make good Instagram posts. We're talking about the unglamorous, practical techniques that actually kept people alive when times got rough. So let's dig into 7 forgotten survival techniques that modern preppers ignore. Number 7, ash lye soap making. Let's start with something that'll make you appreciate your local Dollar General. Making soap from scratch using nothing but wood ash and animal fat. Yeah, I know, not sexy, not tactical, definitely not going in your bug-out bag. But here's the thing. Hygiene is one of the first things that goes sideways in any long-term survival situation. And soap is something most preppers just stockpile, which is fine until it runs out. Our ancestors figured this out thousands of years ago. You take hardwood ash, oak, hickory, maple, the good stuff, and you leach it with water. The water pulls out potassium carbonate and other alkaline compounds that, when processed, create your lye. You're basically making one of the most caustic substances known to chemistry in a bucket, which should tell you something about how serious people were about staying clean. The process isn't complicated, but it requires patience. You fill a barrel or container with your wood ash, pour water through it slowly, and collect the runoff. The liquid that drips out is your lye water. Old-timers had a test for whether it was strong enough. Drop a fresh egg in it. If the egg floats with an area about the size of a quarter showing above the surface, your lye is ready. Too scientific for you? They also said if it made your fingers slippery and slightly burned, you were in business. Health and safety regulations would have a field day with that one. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all wood ash is created equal. Hardwoods contain higher concentrations of the minerals you need. Softwoods like pine are too resinous and won't work properly. Our ancestors knew this from experience, not from chemistry textbooks. They knew that ash from the same wood they used for smoking meat would make better soap than ash from quick-burning softwood they used for kindling. The leaching setup matters too. Traditional setups used a barrel elevated on stones with a small hole drilled near the bottom. You'd pack the ash, sometimes layering it with straw to help filter the liquid. Then you'd pour rainwater. Soft water works better than hard water, over the top, and let it slowly drip through. The first runoff might be weak, so you'd collect it and run it through fresh ash again to concentrate it. Some folks did this 3 or 4 times to get really strong lye. Once you've got your lye water, you need fat. Rendered animal fat, specifically. Tallow from beef, lard from pigs, whatever you've got. And here's where another skill comes in. Rendering. You can't just toss chunks of fat into your soap. You need to slowly melt it, strain out the impurities, and get pure, clean fat. Do it wrong, and your soap smells terrible or goes rancid within weeks. You heat the fat until it's liquid, slowly add your lye water while stirring constantly, and then keep stirring and stirring and stirring some more. The mixture needs to reach what's called trace, when it's thick enough that drizzled soap leaves a trail on the surface before sinking back in. This can take hours, literal hours of stirring over a fire. Try to rush it and you get separation. The lye and fat split apart, and you've got a greasy, caustic mess instead of soap. Here's what modern preppers miss. This isn't just about making soap. It's about understanding caustic chemistry without a laboratory. It's about rendering fat properly so it doesn't go rancid. It's about fuel management, because you need to keep that mixture at the right temperature for hours without burning it. It's about patience and observation. It's a cascade of skills that build on each other. Temperature control is critical too. Too hot, and you cook the soap, ruining the texture. Too cool, and it won't saponify properly. Our ancestors didn't have thermometers. They managed temperature by the size of the fire, the distance from the flame, and constant stirring. They could tell by how the mixture moved on the spoon, whether it was ready or needed more time. A 19th century homesteader's guide put it this way: the woman who can make good soap can make most anything else she needs. That wasn't poetry. That was recognition that soap making required you to master fire, rendering, chemistry, and patience. Get those right, and you could tackle just about any other homestead skill. Modern preppers stockpile batteries and ammunition. Nothing wrong with that, but our great-grandparents stockpiled wood ash and saved every scrap of fat. because they knew that cleanliness prevented more deaths than bullets ever would. They understood that disease killed more people in hard times than violence. Soap meant clean wounds. Clean wounds meant survival. When's the last time you saved your bacon grease for anything other than flavoring? Number 6. Root cellaring without electricity. Next up, keeping food cold without a refrigerator. I know. You've got a generator. You've got solar panels. You've got a backup battery system that could power a small village. That's great. What's your plan when those fail, or when you're somewhere none of that matters? Root cellaring is probably the most underestimated survival technique out there. It's not glamorous. There's no gear to review. You can't really do an unboxing video about a hole in the ground. But it works. And it's worked for thousands of years. The principle is simple. You use the Earth's natural temperature regulation to keep food at around 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit with high humidity between 85 and 95%. That's your sweet spot for long-term storage of root vegetables, apples, cabbages, and a bunch of other staples that could keep you fed through a winter. But here's where it gets interesting. It's not just about digging a hole. Our ancestors understood microclimates in ways that would make modern agricultural scientists nod with respect. They knew which side of a hill stayed coolest. They knew how to channel cold air and keep warm air out. They understood moisture control without hygrometers or humidity sensors. Location matters more than most people realize. You want north or northeast facing if possible, where the sun hits least. You want good drainage. Build in a spot where water naturally flows away, or you'll end up with a flooded cellar and rotting food. You want to be below the frost line, but not so deep you hit groundwater. Our ancestors figured all this out through observation and, let's be honest, some expensive mistakes. A proper root cellar needs ventilation. Cold air needs to come in at the bottom. Warm air needs to escape at the top. But you can't just leave it open, or everything freezes. Or worse, critters move in and throw a party with your winter food supply. You need baffles. You need drain systems for excess moisture. And you need to understand what foods can be stored together and which ones will make each other rot faster. Apples, for instance, give off ethylene gas, which makes potatoes sprout, so you separate them. Onions need dry conditions. Root vegetables need moisture. You're essentially managing a complex ecosystem in a dark hole in the ground, using nothing but knowledge and observation. The humidity requirements are specific too. Too dry, and your vegetables shrivel up. Too wet, and you get mold. The traditional solution was a dirt floor, which naturally regulates moisture. If you had to use concrete or wood, you needed pans of water strategically placed, or you needed to pack vegetables in damp sand or sawdust, different solutions for different conditions. And the organization inside matters. You don't just pile everything in a heap. Potatoes go in bins or crates where they can share moisture with each other. Carrots and beets get packed in damp sand. Cabbage and turnips get wrapped individually to control odor and moisture. Apples go on slatted shelves where air can circulate around them. Each vegetable has its own requirements. The Foxfire book, which documented traditional Appalachian skills in the 1970s, included dozens of pages on root cellaring because the old-timers they interviewed still remembered when this was the difference between eating and starving come February. One farmer told them, "The ground don't need batteries and it don't break down. It just is what it is." Temperature monitoring was constant. You checked daily, sometimes multiple times a day in fall and spring when temperatures fluctuated. Too cold and you cracked a vent to let warm air in. Too warm and you opened vents at night to let cold air sink in. It was active management, not passive storage. Modern preppers will spend thousands on freeze dryers and vacuum sealers. Again, nothing wrong with that. But if you can't keep a bushel of potatoes from rotting in a root cellar, you're missing something fundamental about food preservation. The earth is a free refrigerator if you know how to use it. And unlike every piece of modern equipment, it doesn't break, doesn't need parts, and doesn't require fuel. Number 5, felting and wool processing. Here's where things get really old school. Processing wool from sheep into usable fabric without any modern equipment. Stick with me here, because this is about way more than making sweaters. Most modern preppers think about clothing in terms of layers and tactical fabrics. Sure, you've got your moisture-wicking base layer and your insulated mid-layer and your waterproof shell. Very nice. What happens when those wear out? You going to manufacture Gore-Tex in your backyard? Our ancestors had wool. and they had the knowledge to turn it from a stinking, greasy mess on a sheep's back into fabric that could keep you alive in winter. The process is called felting, and it's one of the oldest textile techniques in human history. First, you've got to shear the sheep. That's a skill in itself. But let's assume you've managed that without traumatizing the poor animal. Now you've got raw wool, which is full of lanolin, dirt, plant matter, and things you don't want to think about too hard. You wash it, carding fleece they called it, but not too much, or you lose all the lanolin, which is what makes wool water resistant. Next comes carding, aligning the fibers so they're all going the same direction. Old-timers used hand cards, which look like paddles with thousands of tiny wire teeth. You pull the wool between the cards over and over until the fibers line up. It's repetitive, it's tedious, and it's absolutely necessary. But here's where felting differs from spinning. Instead of making yarn, you're creating solid fabric through agitation, heat, and moisture. You layer the carded wool, wet it with hot water, add soap, and then you work it. Rub it, press it, fold it, rub it some more. The friction and heat cause the wool fibers to lock together into a dense, water-resistant fabric. Felt made this way is surprisingly durable. It was used for hats, boots, blankets, and saddle pads. Mongolian nomads built entire portable houses, yurts, using felt. It insulates when wet, it breathes, and it lasts for years if maintained properly. A shepherding manual from the 1800s noted, "A man who knows wool knows warmth, and a man who knows warmth knows survival." Bit dramatic, maybe? But in a world where hypothermia killed as many people as starvation, they had a point. Modern preppers obsess over which synthetic fabric dries fastest or insulates best. But wool, actual, processed by hand wool, will still keep you warm even when it's soaking wet. Try that with your polyester fleece. The knowledge of how to process it from scratch? That's rare these days. Most people wouldn't know where to start. Number 4, charcoal making for water. Filtration. Let's talk about water. Every prepper knows you need clean water. Every prepper has a filter, or tablets, or a UV purifier, or all three. Great. What's your plan when those run out or break? Activated charcoal is one of the most effective filtration media you can use. It removes chemicals, heavy metals, toxins, and organic compounds that boiling won't touch. You can buy it, sure, but you can also make it, and that's something our ancestors did routinely. The process is called retort charcoal making, and it's both simple and finicky. You start with hardwood. Willow was traditional, but birch, oak, or maple work fine. You cut it into small pieces, pack it into a metal container that can be sealed, and then you heat that container in a fire. The key is that the wood inside the container doesn't burn. It smolders in a low oxygen environment. What happens is pyrolysis. The wood breaks down from heat, releasing gases and leaving behind almost pure carbon. That's your charcoal. But for water filtration, you need to take it one step further and activate it, which means creating a massively porous structure that can trap contaminants. The old school method was to bury the hot charcoal in a pit with good airflow and let it cool slowly, or to quench it in a specific way that created the porous structure you need. Some folks would reheat the charcoal with steam, which opened up the pores even more. The principle is the same as modern activated charcoal, just done with fire and observation instead of industrial processes. The science is actually fascinating. When you activate charcoal properly, you create millions of tiny pores throughout the structure. 1 gram of activated charcoal can have a surface area of 500 to 3,000 square meters. That's roughly the size of several basketball courts, compressed into something the size of a sugar cube. All that surface area is where contamination gets trapped. Once you've got activated charcoal, you can build a filtration system using layers of charcoal, sand, and gravel in a container. Water percolates through the layers and the charcoal catches most of the nasty stuff. The sand and gravel serve multiple purposes. They filter out particulates, they help distribute water flow evenly, and they prevent the charcoal from washing through. The layering matters. Coarse gravel at the bottom for support and drainage, then sand for fine particle filtration, then your activated charcoal layer. Then another layer of sand to prevent charcoal dust from getting into your filtered water. Then more gravel on top to prevent disturbance when you pour water in. Each layer serves a specific purpose. It won't catch everything. You still need to deal with bacteria and viruses through boiling or chemical treatment, but it handles a lot of chemical contamination that other methods miss. agricultural runoff, industrial pollutants, heavy metals, organic compounds, activated charcoal will pull most of that out. And here's the thing, charcoal loses effectiveness over time as the pores fill up. Our ancestors knew this. They knew you had to replace or reactivate your charcoal periodically. They could tell by taste and smell when the filtration was getting weak. They'd pull out the old charcoal, make a fresh batch, and the system kept working. A survival manual from the 1930s Civilian Conservation Corps stated, "Any man who can make good charcoal can make clean water, and clean water is half of staying alive." The other half was food, presumably, but the point stands. Different woods produce charcoal with different properties too. Willow makes fine-poured charcoal that's excellent for removing dissolved substances. Oak makes harder charcoal that lasts longer. Birch falls somewhere in between. Our ancestors learned this through experimentation, not chemical analysis. Modern preppers carry sophisticated ceramic filters and UV sterilizers. Nothing wrong with that. But if you can't make charcoal from wood and understand how to use it for filtration, you're dependent on supply chains and manufacturing. Our ancestors weren't. They understood the chemistry well enough to do it themselves, and the knowledge kept them alive in situations where clean water meant the difference between life and death. Number 3, bark tanning for leather. Leather. Everyone wants it. Nobody knows how to make it anymore. Modern preppers will stockpile leather goods, boots, belts, gloves, but the actual knowledge of how to turn a raw hide into usable leather, that's almost gone. Bark tanning, or vegetable tanning, is the traditional method that uses tannins from tree bark to preserve and strengthen animal hides. It's a process that takes months and requires knowledge that goes way beyond just soak the hide in stuff. First, you've got to flesh the hide, which means scraping off every bit of fat, meat, and membrane. Miss a spot, and that spot will rot. Then, you've got to remove the hair, usually by soaking the hide in a lime solution until the hair loosens. This is called liming, and it also helps break down proteins in the skin that you don't want. After liming, you rinse the hide thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly, to remove all the lime. Then comes the actual tanning. You need tannic acid, which you extract by soaking shredded bark in water. Oak bark was the gold standard in Europe and America. Hemlock bark worked well too. Different barks gave different qualities to the finished leather. You create a tanning bath with increasingly strong concentrations of tannic acid. Start too strong, and the outside of the hide tans while the inside doesn't. Too weak, and nothing happens. You move the hide through progressively stronger baths over weeks or months, constantly monitoring the process. The tannins bind with the collagen in the hide, fundamentally changing its structure so it won't rot. Done right, you end up with leather that's durable, flexible, and can last decades. Done wrong, you've got a stiff, brittle mess that'll crack the first time it gets wet. An old tanner's apprentice manual from the 1890s put it bluntly. Tanning is waiting. Waiting is tanning. If you can't wait, you can't tan. The process couldn't be rushed. It took the time it took. Modern preppers think about leather as something you buy at the store or order online. But in any long-term scenario where manufacturing breaks down, the ability to turn a deer hide into a usable pair of boots is the difference between mobile and crippled. It's not a quick skill. It requires patience, observation, and a whole lot of trial and error to get right. Most people today couldn't tan a hide if their life depended on it. 100 years ago, most rural communities had at least one person who knew how. That knowledge is almost extinct now. Number 2, flax processing for cordage and fabric. You know what's hilarious? Preppers will buy 100 feet of paracord and think they're set for life. Meanwhile, our ancestors grew their own rope in the backyard and thought nothing of it. Flax processing, turning the flax plant into linen fiber, is one of those skills that was once universal and is now practically forgotten. And it's not just about making fabric. Flax gives you fiber for rope, thread, fishing line, and fine linen. It's one of the most useful plants you can grow, and the processing techniques go back thousands of years. Growing flax is the easy part. It's a pretty plant with blue flowers, doesn't need much care, and grows in most temperate climates. The hard part is processing it, which requires several steps that each need to be done correctly, or the whole batch is ruined. First comes retting. You bundle the harvested flax and either soak it in water or lay it in a field and let dew and rain do the work. Either way, You're using bacterial action to break down the pectin that binds the fiber to the woody core of the stem. Too little retting, and the fibers won't separate. Too much, and the bacteria damage the fibers themselves. You've got to monitor it by feel and smell, which means you need experience. After retting comes breaking. You crush the dried stalks to separate the fiber from the woody bits. Then scutching, you beat the fibers to remove the last of the debris. Then hackling, you comb the fibers through increasingly fine combs until you're left with long, smooth strands. Each step removes more waste material and aligns the fibers better. The result is flax fiber that can be spun into thread or twisted into cordage. Fine flax makes linen fabric. Coarser flax makes rope and twine. The waste material, called tow, can be used for stuffing, tinder, or rough cordage. A farming guide from the 1700s stated, "He who has flax has all he needs to bind, to clothe, and to catch his supper." That covered rope, fabric, and fishing line, 3 critical needs from one plant. Modern preppers stockpile synthetic materials and call it good. But in a long-term situation, the ability to grow and process your own fiber gives you independence that no amount of stockpiling can match. You can always grow more flax. You can't grow more paracord. The knowledge of how to process it properly, that's the part we've lost. It was common knowledge for thousands of years. Now it's a historical reenactment curiosity. Number 1, Springhouse food preservation. Last one, and it's probably the most elegant solution on this list, using natural springs for refrigeration and food preservation. If you've got access to a spring, and more people do than realize it, you've got year-round cold storage that never breaks down and never needs power. A springhouse is a small building built over or near a natural spring. The cold water flowing from the ground keeps the interior temperature constant, usually somewhere between 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit depending on the spring. That's not as cold as a refrigerator, but it's cold enough to dramatically slow spoilage. The setup is deceptively simple. You channel the spring water through the building in a shallow trough or series of troughs. You place your perishables, milk, butter, eggs, fresh meat, in containers that sit in or above the water. The flowing water carries away heat and keeps everything cool. But the genius is in the details. You need good airflow to prevent moisture buildup, which means ventilation that doesn't let the cold air escape. You need to protect the spring source itself from contamination, which means understanding watershed and drainage. You need to know which foods can handle the higher temperature and which can't. Milk stored in a spring house could last several days instead of several hours. Butter stayed firm even in summer. Fresh meat could hang for a day or two without spoiling. It wasn't perfect long-term storage, but it bought time to process food before it went bad. More importantly, a well-maintained spring provided clean, cold drinking water year-round. That's huge. In any survival situation, having a reliable, clean water source that also gives you refrigeration is about as good as it gets. The Foxfire books documented several old spring houses still in use in Appalachia in the 1970s. One elderly woman told the interviewers, "Folks nowadays think they invented cold food with their electric boxes. We had cold food just fine, thank you, and ours didn't stop working when the lights went out." Modern preppers focus on generators and fuel stockpiles to keep freezers running. That's valid for short-term situations, but it's entirely dependent on fuel, parts, and infrastructure. A springhouse depends on geology and gravity, both of which are pretty reliable. The knowledge of how to find a spring, how to develop it properly, and how to build and maintain a springhouse, that's almost gone. It was standard homesteading knowledge 100 years ago. Now most people don't even know it's possible, so there you have it. 7 techniques that our grandparents considered basic common sense, and that most modern preppers wouldn't know where to start with. None of them are flashy. You're not going to get a lot of likes posting about ashlie soap or flax processing. But every single one of them represents genuine independence from supply chains and modern infrastructure. Here's the thing, modern prepping has gotten really good at planning for short-term disasters. Grid down for a week? No problem. Bug out to the wilderness for a few days? Covered. But long-term resilience, the kind where you're not just surviving, but actually living for months or years with minimal outside inputs, that requires a different skill set. It requires the unglamorous knowledge that our ancestors took for granted. You don't have to master all of these. You probably shouldn't try, but understanding that these techniques exist, that they work, and that they represent a different philosophy of preparedness, that's valuable. Modern gear is great. Modern knowledge is great. But the old knowledge has been tested over centuries and has kept people alive through situations that would make our worst-case scenarios look like a minor inconvenience. Maybe it's worth learning some of it before it disappears completely. Just a thought. If you found this useful, hit that like button and subscribe for more content on forgotten skills and practical knowledge. And let me know in the comments which of these techniques you'd actually want to learn. I'm curious whether anyone's brave enough to admit they want to make soap from ashes and animal fat.